I reserved a $5,900 venue for my daughter's birthday. When we arrived, the banner read, "Happy 8th, Daniel, my brother's kid." Mom shrugged. "We thought you'd understand." My daughter whispered, "It's okay, maybe next year." I walked out without a word, ended every deposit. By midnight, the entire family group chat exploded. The first thing I saw was the glitter. It was everywhere, shimmering under the recessed lighting of the grand ballroom, catching the light in 1,000 tiny explosions of silver and pink. It was supposed to be magical. For nearly $6,000, it had better be magical. Lily, my daughter, was turning 8, and for her, magic was still real. It was my job, my one true job, to keep it that way for as long as I possibly could. But as my eyes adjusted to the opulent dimness, the magic curdled. Right there, strung between two faux marble pillars in huge, looping, glitter-encrusted letters, was the banner. It read, "Happy 8th, Daniel." My breath caught in my throat, a sharp, painful little snag. Daniel. Who the hell was Daniel? I felt a cold dread wash over me, the kind that starts in your stomach and spreads like ice through your veins. I had booked this place, the Gilded Swan, 6 months in advance. I had confirmed every detail with the event coordinator, a woman named Patricia, no less than 5 times. I had the emails, the signed contract, the receipts. The theme was Enchanted Starlight, all navy blues and sparkling silver, with touches of blush pink for Lily's favorite color. The banner was supposed to say, "Happy 8th birthday, our shining star Lily." I had designed the font myself. I turned, my heart hammering against my ribs, looking for my husband, David. He was supposed to be right behind me, carrying the mountain of presents, but he was lagging, talking to his mother, Eleanor. Of course. She stood there, a picture of serene elegance in a cream-colored pantsuit, her silver hair coiffed perfectly. She had a placid smile on her face as she surveyed the room, a smile that didn't reach her cold, assessing eyes. She saw the banner. I watched her eyes flick to it, and for a fraction of a second, the placid mask slipped. A flicker of something else, something sharp and satisfied, replaced it before it was smoothed away. She knew. "What is that?" I whispered, the words barely audible. David finally came up beside me, Lily holding his other hand, her eyes wide with wonder at the sheer scale of the room. She hadn't noticed the name yet. Thank God. "What's what, honey?" David asked, distracted. "Wow, this place really is something. You did great." He hadn't seen it either. "The banner, David," I said, my voice tight. "Look at the banner." His eyes followed my gaze and his face fell. Oh no, they got the name wrong. "Daniel? Seriously?" He let go of Lily's hand and started walking toward the front desk, already pulling out his phone. "I'll sort this out." Unbelievable. For this price, you'd think they could get the name right. Eleanor glided to my side, placing a cool hand on my arm. "Oh dear," she said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. "What a dreadful mistake. You must be so upset. After all the work you put in." I pulled my arm away. "Something's not right, Eleanor." "Of course not, dear," she cooed. "It's a simple mix-up. These things happen. I'm sure David will have it fixed in a jiffy." She squeezed my arm again, her nails digging in just slightly. "The important thing is not to make a scene. For Lily's sake." My Uncle Marcus, who had driven up from the city for the party, came to stand on my other side. He was a lawyer, sharp and perceptive, and he missed nothing. He had seen the banner, and he was watching Eleanor with a quiet, intense focus. "That's more than a simple mix-up, Eleanor," he said, his voice low and even. "That's a different party altogether." He was right. I started to look around, really look. The color scheme was wrong. It was blue and silver, yes, but it was a harsh royal blue, not the deep navy I'd chosen. And there were little plastic astronauts on every table as centerpieces. Astronauts. Lily was into fairies and unicorns. The cake, visible on a far table, was a multi-tiered monstrosity shaped like a rocket ship. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just the wrong banner, this was Daniel's entire party. We had walked into the wrong celebration. David came striding back, his face pale. "They're saying our party is in the Rose Room, the small one, by the kitchens." "The Rose Room?" I choked out. "That room holds 30 people, David. We invited 75. The contract is for the grand ballroom." "I know," he said, running a hand through his hair. They said the booking was changed. Last month. They have an email confirmation." "From who?" I demanded, my voice rising. "I didn't change anything." Eleanor stepped forward, placing herself between David and me, a calming, mediating presence. Or so she appeared. Now, let's not get hysterical. There's clearly been a misunderstanding." She turned to David. "Show me the email, dear." David fumbled with his phone and showed it to her. I leaned over her shoulder to see. It was a forwarded chain. The final confirmation was from an email address I didn't recognize. It authorized the change of venue to the Rose Room and a change of theme to Outer Space Adventure. It was signed with my name. A forgery. A clumsy one, but apparently effective. "I never sent this," I said, the words feeling thin in the vast, wrong room. "I've never even seen that email address." Eleanor sighed, a long, theatrical exhalation of weary patience. She turned to me, her expression now one of profound concern, the kind a doctor gives when delivering bad news. "Sarah, darling," she began, her voice soft and dangerously gentle. "We need to be honest here. Your memory. It hasn't always been your strong suit, has it? Especially when you're under stress. Ice. Pure, solid ice. It filled my chest, my throat, my head. She was doing it. Right here, in front front of my daughter, in front of my uncle. She was pulling out the old poisoned knife, the one she'd been using to stab me in the back for years. My past struggles with anxiety, the brief, terrifying period after a car accident years ago when I became dependent on painkillers before getting clean. She had always held it over me, a trump card of instability she could play whenever I challenged her. "Don't you dare, Eleanor," I warned, my voice shaking with a rage so potent it almost blinded me. She ignored me, turning her performance to David and my uncle Marcus. She gets so overwhelmed. Planning this big party, it was too much for her. It's no wonder she got confused, made a mistake, and then forgot all about it. It's happened before. David looked from his mother to me, his face a mess of confusion and weakness. He wanted to believe me, but his mother's influence was a powerful, lifelong current, and he was never a strong swimmer. "Mom, I don't think—" "It's all right, son," Eleanor said, patting his arm. "It's not her fault. Her mind just plays tricks on her. We'll make do with the Rose Room. It will be cozier." She gave me a look that was pure, venomous triumph. She thought she had won. She thought I would crumble just like I was supposed to. But something was different this time. Maybe it was the sheer audacity of it, the scale of the sabotage, the fact that she was willing to ruin her own granddaughter's birthday just to prove a point, to put me back in my place. Or maybe it was because my uncle was standing right there, his expression unreadable but his presence a solid wall at my back. I felt a strange calm descend over the fury. It was the calm of absolute certainty. Lily, bless her innocent heart, finally piped up. "Mommy, who's Daniel?" I knelt down, turning her away from the banner and cupped her face in my hands. "Honey, there's been a little mix-up with the room. We're going to a different one, okay? A special, secret room." I forced a smile that felt like cracking glass. Eleanor saw her opening. "Yes," she said brightly, "a much more manageable room, so your mother doesn't get too agitated." And that's when she went too far. She had played her hand, confident in my weakness, in David's pliability, in the public setting that would surely prevent a scene. But she had miscalculated. She didn't realize that the foundation she thought I was standing on, a fragile platform of self-doubt and past trauma, had been rebuilt, piece by painstaking piece, in years of therapy and recovery. It was now solid ground. I stood up slowly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "You did this," I said, the words dropping like stones into the sudden silence around us. Eleanor actually laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Sarah, you're being paranoid. It's a symptom, you know. You should really talk to your doctor about adjusting your medication." "I'm not on medication, Eleanor," I said, my voice dangerously level. "Not for a long time. You know that." "Of course, dear. Whatever you say." She waved a dismissive hand. "You called the venue. You pretended to be me, or you had someone else do it. You changed the room. You changed the theme. You sabotaged my daughter's birthday party to make me look incompetent and unstable." Each sentence was a nail, and I was hammering them in, one by one. The facade finally cracked. The serene mask melted away, and the raw, ugly narcissism underneath was laid bare. Her eyes narrowed into slits. "Incompetent? My dear, you've been incompetent since the day you married my son. Unstable? You were a walking disaster. I have done nothing but try to protect my family from you, from your condition." It was a confession, wrapped in the guise of an accusation. She was gloating. She was so sure of her power that she was admitting it, right here and now. "This party was absurd," she hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper, but loud enough for David and Marcus to hear clearly. "Nearly $6,000 for an 8-year-old's birthday? It's the height of irresponsibility. It's the kind of manic, impulsive decision-making that frankly worried me. I did what was necessary. I scaled it back to something reasonable. The Rose Room was perfectly adequate, and I kept the deposit you would have lost from your foolish excess. I had it applied to David's car payment. You're welcome." My blood ran cold. The car payment. It wasn't just about making me look bad. It was about control. Financial control. She had taken my money, the money I had specifically saved for this one extravagant gift for my daughter, and redirected it. "You stole from me," I whispered, horrified. "I reallocated family resources," she corrected me sharply. "Something you clearly know nothing about. You throw money away on glitter and fantasy while real bills need to be paid. David is too soft on you. Someone has to be the responsible adult. Someone has to protect Lily from your flights of fancy. What's next? A pony? A trip to Paris? You need to be managed, Sarah, for your own good." David just stood there, speechless, his mouth hanging open as he looked at his mother. The spell was breaking. He was finally seeing her, not as the matriarch, but as the monster. And then, the final devastating blow. She leaned in closer, her perfume cloying and suffocating. "And as for Daniel," she sneered, "I thought it was a lovely touch. It's a good, strong name. The name I wanted for my first grandson. Before you came along and filled my son's head with your sentimental nonsense and named her Lily. That was it. That was the moment everything broke. It wasn't just about a party anymore. It wasn't about money or control. It was about my daughter's very existence. She was erasing my child, replacing her with the ghost of a grandson she never had, all to punish me. Before I could react, before I could scream or cry or lunge at her, my Uncle Marcus stepped forward. He moved with a quiet, lethal grace. He placed a hand on my shoulder, a silent signal to hold steady, and then he addressed Eleanor. His voice was no longer quiet. It was was clear, precise, and echoed with the authority of a courtroom. "Eleanor," he said, and her head snapped toward him. "I am Sarah's legal counsel, and I have just heard you confess to wire fraud, theft by deception, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. This entire conversation, by the way, is being recorded." He held up his phone, the screen showing a red recording icon. "The venue manager, who is standing right over there, has also been listening. I suggest you leave the premises immediately. If you attempt to contact Sarah, David, or Lily again, I will personally file for an emergency protective order so fast your head will spin. Are we clear?" Eleanor stared at him, her face a mask of pure shock, then rage. The color drained from her cheeks, then rushed back in a blotchy red tide. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time in her life, she was utterly, completely silenced. She had overplayed her hand, and the whole deck of cards had just come crashing down on her head. She shot one last look at me, a look of such pure, undiluted hatred that it almost took my breath away. Then she turned on her heel and swept out of the ballroom, a queen retreating from a battle she had already lost. The silence she left behind was deafening. David finally seemed to snap out of his stupor. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a dawning horror and shame. "Sarah, I didn't know. I know," I said, my voice hollow, and I did. I knew he was weak, not malicious, but that was no longer an excuse. Not anymore. I looked at Lily, who was watching us with wide, confused eyes. I picked her up, holding her tight against my chest, burying my face in her hair. The party was ruined. The day was a disaster. But in the wreckage, something new was beginning. The fight for my life. The fight for my daughter's life. And this time, I wasn't fighting alone. We didn't stay at the Gilded Swan. Marcus handled the furious manager, promising to follow up about the contract, the forged email, and the complicity of whichever employee Eleanor had manipulated. He got a full refund, plus an offer for a future event, which I knew I would never take. We gathered the presents, piled back into our cars, and drove home in a stunned, heavy silence. Lily was quiet, sensing the immense gravity of the adult world that had just crashed into her birthday. Once home, I ordered 3 large pizzas and we sat on the living room floor, eating from the boxes. Lily opened her presents, mustering as much enthusiasm as she could, but the pall of the afternoon's events was unshakable. That night, after Lily was asleep, David and I had the conversation we should have had years ago. He sat on the edge of our bed, his head in his hands, repeating over and over again, "I'm so sorry. I had no idea she was capable of that." "Didn't you, David?" I asked, my voice devoid of accusation, just filled with a profound weariness. "Or did you just not want to see it? Every time I told you she was undermining me, you said I was being too sensitive. Every time I said she was manipulative, you said that was just her way. You enabled her. You let her poison our marriage and our home because you were too scared to stand up to your own mother." He couldn't deny it. The truth was laid bare between us, ugly and undeniable. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice small. "I don't know what we do," I said honestly, "but I know what I am doing. I am cutting her out, completely. She will not see Lily. She will not speak to me. And if you are not capable of supporting that, of protecting your own family from her, then you and I have a much bigger problem." It was an ultimatum, and we both knew it. His choice was simple: his mother or his wife and child. The next morning, the reality of the fight ahead began to sink in. Marcus came over with a laptop and a grimly determined expression. We sat at the kitchen table, the remnants of the sad makeshift party still visible, and he laid out the first steps. "Documentation," he said, his voice all business. "Every single thing, from this moment backward. I want every nasty text message, every backhanded email, every time she forgot to pass on a message or accidentally told a neighbor something private about you. We need to build a timeline of her behavior, not just for a potential lawsuit against her for the party fiasco, but for what's coming next." "What's coming next?" I asked, a knot of fear tightening in my stomach. "She's not going to take this lying down," Marcus said grimly. "She's been exposed. Narcissists don't handle exposure well. They lash out. She's going to go on the offensive. She's going to try to prove that she was right all along, that you are unstable, and that she was just trying to protect her family." He was right. The first letter arrived 2 days later. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize. It was a formal petition for grandparents' visitation rights, coupled with a motion for a court-ordered psychological evaluation of me. The petition was a masterpiece of fiction, painting Eleanor as a doting, concerned grandmother, and me as a volatile, mentally fragile mother who was unfairly alienating her from her only grandchild. It cited my history of substance abuse and emotional instability. It twisted my past into a weapon, just as I knew she would. Reading it felt like being physically assaulted. Every private vulnerability, every struggle I had overcome, was laid out in cold, legal language, distorted and magnified to make me look like a monster. I felt the old panic rising, the familiar tightness in my chest, the urge to crawl into a hole and disappear. But then I looked at a picture of Lily on the fridge, smiling with a gap in her teeth, and the panic solidified into cold, hard resolve. I would not let her do this. Thus began the meticulous, soul-crushing process of compiling evidence. I spent hours, days, scrolling back through years of text messages, saving screenshots of Eleanor's passive-aggressive comments, her veiled insults, her constant attempts to drive a wedge between David and me. I printed out emails where she'd gone over my head on decisions about Lily's schooling or healthcare. I wrote down in excruciating detail every memory I had of her gaslighting, every instance where she'd made me doubt my own sanity. It was like reliving 1,000 tiny deaths. Each entry in the log I created was another cut, another reminder of the poison I had allowed into my life for far too long. I also started therapy again, with a woman who specialized in trauma and narcissistic abuse. In our first session, I just cried. I cried for the years I spent trying to win the approval of a woman who was incapable of giving it. I cried for my husband, who was so broken by her that he couldn't protect his own family. And I cried for my daughter, whose beautiful 8th birthday had been turned into a battlefield. My therapist, Dr. Anya Sharma, listened patiently. When I was done, she said something that became my mantra. This is not your shame to carry. You are reclaiming your story. Let the truth be your shield. Meanwhile, David was finally, belatedly, stepping up. The legal petition shocked him into action. He called his mother, and for the first time in his life, he drew a hard line. I wasn't there for the call, but he told me he was calm and firm. He told her she had crossed a line, that her actions were unforgivable, and that until she dropped the lawsuit and sought professional help, she was to have no contact with him or his family. Her response, he said, was a torrent of rage, accusations, and emotional blackmail. She accused me of brainwashing him. She threatened to cut him out of her will. She wept and wailed that her only son was abandoning her in her old age. He held firm. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done, and I could see the toll it took on him, but it was also the first step in him earning back my trust. Eleanor's retaliation was swift and brutal. The character assassination campaign began in earnest. She started calling family members, aunts, uncles, cousins, and feeding them a carefully curated narrative of my instability. Suddenly, my phone started ringing with calls from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, all offering concerned advice. My cousin Brenda called to suggest a specific rehabilitation center. David's Aunt Carol left a voicemail telling me she was praying for my sobriety and that I should let Eleanor see Lily because a child needs her grandmother's stabilizing influence. Each call was a fresh wound. These were people who had only ever seen the polished, perfect version of Eleanor. They couldn't imagine her being the villain. It was so much easier for them to believe the story she was selling, that I, the outsider, the one with a documented history of struggle, was the problem. It was an incredibly effective strategy. She was isolating me, turning the very concept of family into another weapon to be used against me. The financial pressure started too. Eleanor had always been the gatekeeper of the family's wealth, which came from her late husband. She sent David a formal letter, drafted by her lawyer, informing him that the trust fund he was set to inherit had been restructured. His access to it would now be conditional upon his cooperation in ensuring his daughter's welfare, which was a thinly veiled threat, meaning he had to side with her against me. It was a classic move, leverage and coercion. She was trying to buy his loyalty, to force him to choose between his mother's money and his wife's sanity. To his credit, David didn't buckle. He took the letter to Marcus, who just laughed. "This is a gift," Marcus said, scanning the document. "This is clear evidence of malicious intent and coercion. She's trying to manipulate a legal proceeding through financial threats. A judge is going to love this." We added it to the growing mountain of evidence. The rock-bottom moment came about a month into the legal battle. A process server showed up at our door with a new filing, an emergency motion for temporary custody of Lily, to be granted to Eleanor. The motion was filled with the most outrageous lies. It included a sworn affidavit from a distant cousin of David's, claiming she had witnessed me being erratically drunk at a family barbecue 2 years prior. I hadn't had a drink in over a decade. It included a statement from a former neighbor, whom Eleanor was still friendly with, suggesting I often left Lily unattended, which was a complete fabrication. But the most devastating part was that she had somehow obtained my sealed medical records from my recovery after the car accident. Her lawyer was arguing that my history of prescription drug dependency made me an unfit parent, and that my recent paranoid delusions about Eleanor were a sign of an imminent relapse. Seeing my most private pain, my hardest-won battle, twisted into a legal weapon to take my child away from me, I broke. I locked myself in the bathroom and just sat on the floor, shaking. The old voices, the ones that told me I was worthless, that I was broken, that she was right all along, came roaring back. For a terrifying moment, I understood why people relapsed. The desire to just numb it all, to make the pain stop, was overwhelming. I thought about giving up. Maybe it would be easier to just let her win. Let her have Lily. At least my daughter would be safe from all this ugliness. It was David who found me. He didn't try to talk me out of it. He just sat on the floor with me, wrapped his arms around me, and let me fall apart. He held me until the shaking stopped, and then he said, "We're not letting her win, Sarah. I let her hurt you for years. I will not let her take our daughter. We fight together." It was the turning point for him and for us. He was finally fully in the trenches with me. The next day, my resolve was back, harder than ever. Marcus filed our response, refuting every single lie with evidence. We had photos and witness statements proving I was sober at the barbecue in question. We had affidavits from our current neighbors attesting to my attentive parenting, and Marcus filed a motion for sanctions against Eleanor's lawyer for illegally obtaining my sealed medical records, a serious ethical and legal breach. The fight was getting dirtier, but we were fighting back with the truth. The investigative process was slow and grinding. It involved depositions, subpoenas, and endless paperwork. Marcus decided our best strategy was to focus on the birthday party incident. It was the clearest, most undeniable example of her malice. He subpoenaed the records from the Gilded Swan. He wanted every email, every call log, every internal note related to the booking. The breakthrough, the evidentiary turning point, came from an unexpected source. A young woman named Chloe, who had been the junior event coordinator at the venue, contacted Marcus. She had quit her job shortly after our disastrous event, riddled with guilt. She was willing to give a sworn statement. Her deposition was a bombshell. Chloe testified that Eleanor had called the venue multiple times, claiming to be my assistant. She had been incredibly charming and persuasive. She had told Chloe that I was going through a personal crisis and had become overwhelmed, and that she, Eleanor, was stepping in to simplify the event to reduce my stress. She confirmed that Eleanor had authorized all the changes, the room, the theme, the cake, but the most damning part was the money. Eleanor had convinced Chloe to process a partial refund on my credit card for the difference in room cost, but instead of the money going back to my card, Eleanor had provided her own bank account details for a direct transfer, claiming it was a family account used for household bills. She had bribed Chloe with a $500 cash tip for her trouble and for keeping the changes discreet, telling her it was to be a surprise for me. Chloe had the bank transfer receipt. She had a record of the account number. It was Eleanor's personal savings account. It was fraud. It was theft. It was the smoking gun. Marcus was ecstatic. "We've got her," he said, a grim smile on his face. "She's not going to be able to lie her way out of this." With this new evidence, the landscape of the case shifted dramatically. The judge in the custody case threw out Eleanor's emergency motion, calling it frivolous and malicious. He ordered Eleanor to pay for all of our legal fees associated with defending against it. He also took the extraordinary step of issuing a temporary restraining order, forbidding her from contacting us or coming within 500 feet of our home or Lily's school. It was a huge victory, but we knew it wasn't over. The main custody hearing was still scheduled, and we also had the option of pursuing criminal charges for the fraud. Marcus advised against pursuing criminal charges. "It's a higher burden of proof," he explained, "and a criminal trial would be a circus, incredibly traumatic for you and Lily. Our goal isn't to put her in jail. Our goal is to protect Lily and secure your legal standing as a fit and capable parent, permanently. Let's use the fraud as leverage in the family court case. Let's prove a pattern of malicious behavior so profound that no judge in their right mind would ever grant her visitation, let alone custody." It was a strategic decision, trading the satisfaction of criminal punishment for the certainty of protecting my child. It was a hard pill to swallow, but I knew he was right. The weeks leading up to the final hearing were a blur of preparation. I met with Marcus almost daily, going over my testimony. He prepped me for the cross-examination, playing the role of Eleanor's ruthless attorney. He asked me brutal questions about my past, about my therapy, about every mistake I'd ever made as a parent. It was agonizing, but it was necessary. I had to be ready to face the worst of it without falling apart on the stand. My therapist gave me grounding techniques. Focus on my breathing, feel my feet on the floor, twist the ring on my finger. Simple things to keep me in the present moment when the trauma of the past was being thrown in my face. The day of the hearing arrived. The courtroom was cold and impersonal. Eleanor sat at the opposing table, looking smaller and older than I'd ever seen her. She wouldn't meet my eye. David sat beside me, his hand resting on my back, a silent, solid support. When it was my turn to testify, my heart pounded in my chest. But as I sat in the witness box and swore to tell the truth, a sense of calm washed over me. This was it. This was my chance to speak my story, on the record, protected by the law. I answered Marcus's questions clearly and concisely. I recounted the events of the birthday party, the years of subtle manipulation, the escalating campaign of harassment after I cut her off. I was factual, I was calm, and I did not cry. Then came the cross-examination. Eleanor's lawyer was exactly as ruthless as Marcus had predicted. He came at me hard, trying to paint me as an unreliable narrator. "Mrs. Evans, isn't it true that you have a history of mental health challenges?" he began. "I have been treated for anxiety, yes," I said calmly. "And isn't it true that you were addicted to prescription narcotics?" "I developed a dependency on prescribed painkillers after a severe car accident 10 years ago," I corrected him. "I sought treatment, and I have been in recovery for 9 years. So your perception of events can be skewed? You admit your memory isn't always reliable?" He pushed. "My memory of the last 9 years is perfectly clear," I said, looking directly at the judge. "My recovery taught me the value of rigorous honesty. I live by it." He tried to twist my words, to rattle me, but it didn't work. The preparation had paid off. I stayed calm. I stayed factual. I twisted my ring and felt my feet on the floor. The final part of the hearing was the presentation of evidence. Marcus methodically laid out the case. He presented the emails, the text messages, the bank statements. He put Chloe, the event coordinator, on the stand. Her testimony was unshakable. When Marcus presented the receipt receipt showing the transfer of my refunded money into Eleanor's private account. A gasp went through the small public gallery. It was undeniable proof. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, listened to everything without expression. When it was all over, she took a recess to review the evidence. It felt like the longest hour of my life. When she returned, she looked directly at Eleanor. "Mrs. Eleanor Evans," the judge began, her voice ringing with cold authority. "In my 20 years on this bench, I have rarely seen a more calculated and cruel campaign of psychological abuse waged by one family member against another. Your actions, particularly concerning the sabotage of your granddaughter's birthday party and the subsequent fraudulent transfer of funds, are not just morally reprehensible, they border on criminal. Your attempt to use the petitioner's past health struggles to strip her of her child is frankly disgusting." She paused, letting the words hang in the silent room. "Your petition for grandparents' visitation is denied. It is denied with prejudice, meaning you may not file again. I am also issuing a permanent restraining order. You are to have no contact, direct or indirect, with Sarah Evans, David Evans, or their daughter, Lily Evans. A violation of this order will result in your immediate arrest. This court finds Sarah Evans to be a fit, loving, and capable parent. This matter is closed." It was over. I felt the air leave my lungs in a rush. I sagged in my seat, and David's arm came around me, holding me up. I looked over at Eleanor. She was staring at the judge, her face white with disbelief. She had lost, utterly and completely. Her power, her control, her entire narrative had been dismantled and destroyed in a public forum. We walked out of the courthouse into the bright sunlight, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The justice wasn't perfect. Eleanor would never face a criminal trial. She would never have to truly pay for the years of emotional damage she had inflicted. She would simply be gone. And I had to accept that this was its own form of justice. It wasn't about punishment. It was about peace. It was about freedom. The aftermath was quiet. The enabling family members who had sided with Eleanor fell silent. Some tried to reach out with half-hearted apologies, but the trust was broken beyond repair. We politely but firmly cut them out too. Our world became smaller, but it was safer. It was real. David and I entered couples counseling to work through the damage her influence had caused to our marriage. It was hard work, but we were committed to rebuilding on a foundation of honesty and mutual protection. I focused on rebuilding my own life. I continued my therapy, learning to set boundaries not just with others, but with myself. I learned to trust my own perceptions again, to honor my own feelings. The scars were there, a faint tracery of old wounds that would likely never fade completely. There were days when a stray comment or a bad memory would send a jolt of the old fear through me. But now, I knew how to handle it. I had the tools. I had the truth. A few weeks after the hearing, Lily and I threw a second 8th birthday party. It was in our backyard. We had a bouncy castle, a piñata, and a homemade cake shaped like a unicorn. All her friends from school came. It was loud and chaotic and joyful. There was no glitter, no grand ballroom, no pretense. It cost less than $200, and it was the most magical day of her life. That evening, after all the guests had gone home, and the backyard was littered with wrapping paper and streamers, Lily and I sat on the porch swing, watching the fireflies begin to blink in the twilight. She leaned her head on my shoulder, sticky with cake and happiness. "This was the best birthday ever, Mommy," she murmured, her voice sleepy. I kissed the top of her head, my heart so full it felt like it might burst. "I'm so glad, my sweet girl," I whispered. We sat there for a long time, just swinging gently in the quiet of our new, peaceful world. The fight had been long and ugly, and it had taken a part of me I would never get back. But in its place, something stronger had grown. I had found my voice. I had protected my child. I had reclaimed my life. And in the soft summer dusk, surrounded by the quiet hum of a life I had fought for and won, I knew with absolute certainty that it was worth it.